Aslaug Ketilsdottir cut her own mark out of the cloth before she would let it go out of the house, and she did it kneeling on the cold floor with a little curved knife, in a hurry, because the man come to collect it was already at the gate. It was not a big mark. It was 3 threads of undyed brown laid into the headband of a 16L sailcloth, a small crooked shape like a bird's foot. And it was there because a woman's hands do not know how to stop being hers. She had put it in without deciding to, the way her mother had before her, and her mother's mother before that. And on the Vestsund, a cloth reader could hold a corner of that band up to a doorway and say Bekkstad in the same voice a man uses to say his own name. Nobody was allowed to say Bekkstad over a cloth anymore, so she cut the threads out, 1, 2, 3, and picked them free with the point of the knife, and the little bird's foot came apart into nothing, and there was a soft place in the weave where it had been, and she rubbed it hard with the heel of her hand until it looked like wear instead of a wound. "He's in the yard," said Gudny from the other side of the loom, who was near 70 and heard almost nothing, and who could nevertheless always tell when a horse had come up the path, because the hens told her. "I know, he's early." The cloth was rolled by the time Thorleif got his boots off the snow and put his head in at the door. He was Rekstad's steward, a broad, pleasant man of about 40 with a bad hip and no unkindness in him at all, which was somehow worse than if he had been cruel about it. He looked at the bolt on the trestle, and he looked at Aslaug on her knees with the knife still in her hand, and he had the decency, every spring and every autumn for 11 winters, to look somewhere else while she got up. "That's a good weight," he said. "It's what she asked for. She'll say it's heavy." "It's what she asked for," Aslaug said again, and Thorleif smiled a little and did not argue, because they both knew Ingunn of Bekkstad would say it was heavy and take 2 L's off the price for it, and they both knew Aslaug would take what was offered, and there was no part of that conversation either of them needed to have out loud after 11 winters of having it. He counted the silver into her hand. It was less than half of what the cloth would fetch at Sandvik in the spring. The rest was the price of the mark, not her mark. Rekstad's mark, a red thread and a black thread twisted together and run 3 times through the headband, which was what any man on that water looked for when he was buying sailcloth. Ingunn Sigvaldadottir of Bekkstad had a weaving room with 9 looms in it and 11 women working them, and she could not, on the best year she ever had, put out cloth like the cloth that came down off the hill from Bekkstad. So she bought it and put her own mark in it and sold it as her own, and that was not a secret, exactly, and it was not spoken of either. And every house on the Vestsund knew, and none of them would ever be the one to say it, because the day it was said out loud, 2 things happened at once. Aslaug Ketilsdottir would be found to have broken a doom of the assembly, and Ingunn of Bekkstad would be found to have set a false mark, and the law had one answer for that, and it was not a fine. Thorleif put his cap back on. At the door he stopped, the way he stopped every time, and said, "You could come down and work in the house. She'd take you tomorrow. Room, board, and your own loom by the window. And Rekstad's mark in everything I make. It's Rekstad's mark in everything you make now." "Yes," Aslaug said, "but I make it here." He nodded like a man who had known the answer before he asked. Then he took the cloth out to the sledge, and she stood in the door and watched him go down the white path toward the water with 16 L's of her winter on his shoulder, and when he was small, she went back in and knelt down and picked the 3 brown threads up off the floor and put them in the pot with the others. There were a great many of them in there. She had been cutting her name out of her own work since she was 12 years old. The house at Bekkstad stood on a shelf of ground 300 feet above the Vestsund. 1 long room with a loom at the north end and a hearth at the south, and a byre built onto it. And behind it a slope of scree going up into cloud, and in front of it the whole gray length of the sea arm. And the wind came off that water 11 months of the year and made a noise in the roof turf like a man breathing. There were 4 sheep. There was a boat rotting slowly under a shed roof, because no one at Bekkstad had gone on the water in 11 winters, and Aslaug would not have been able to say out loud why not. And there was the loom. It was upright, warp-weighted, taller than she was, black with age and smoke, and it had been her mother's and her grandmother's. And the top beam had a groove worn in it a thumb deep by the passing of thread. Everything else in that house could go, and the house would still be the house. If the loom went, there would be nothing there but a hill. She was 23 that winter. She was small and strong through the shoulders in the way of women who beat cloth for a living, with black hair she wore in a rope down her back, brown eyes, red hands, and a face that people on that water had decided a long time ago was closed. She was an Omega. Everyone knew it. Old Gudny had known it before Aslaug did. The way old women do. It ought to have mattered. On the Vestsund it did not. Twice a year, at the barley moon and again at the Frostmoon, the district gathered at Sandvik, and the unmated stood along the long side of the hall to be looked at, and alphas came down from 4 sounds to look. Aslaug had stood in that hall 4 times. The first time she was 19 and wore her mother's blue gown, and she stood the whole night with her hands folded. And not one man crossed the floor to her, and at the end of it a woman she had known all her life patted her arm and said, kindly, that it was a shame, because she had a good color. She stopped wearing the blue gown after the 2nd time. She stopped going after the 4th. It was not that they were cruel to her. A few of them were, and she could have borne cruelty. She had a tongue when she wanted one. It was that they were embarrassed. A whole hall of people quietly embarrassed on her behalf is a thing that will take the skin off you slower than any insult. Because there was a doom on her house. And in a district where every marriage is a joining of 2 properties before it is anything else, a doomed house is not a house at all. This is what had happened. And it had happened 11 winters before, when Aslaug was 12. There was a ship called Shabjorn out of Sandvik, 12 men aboard her, skippered by a man named Otter Hrathensen. And she went out in the last week of the sailing season for the autumn trading, and she came apart in a north wind off the Troll Skerries in the black dark. And every one of the 12 was lost. Nothing came home but timber and 1 sea chest. It was the worst thing that had ever happened on that water, and the Vestsund never got over it. Because there is no getting over it, there is only a district in which, forever after, a certain number of houses have a certain number of empty places at the board. And a ship that comes apart has to have come apart because of something. Men will not live in a world where a ship simply comes apart. So they went looking. The mast was sound. The keel was sound. The skipper was the best on that water and had been for 20 years. What they had, in the end, was 1 long piece of the sail that came ashore at Nesland with the bolt rope still on it, and the seam had opened, and it had opened in a way that a man who knows cloth will tell you means the cloth failed before the rope did. That sail was woven at Bekkstad by Herdis Torbjornsdottir, Aslaug's mother, over 3 winters, and it was the best thing she ever made. And every soul on the Vestsund had seen it going up the mast in the spring, and had said so. The thing was held at Sandvik in the first week of winter. Aslaug remembered almost nothing about it, except that her mother had made her stand outside with the horses, and that when it was over her mother came out and put her hood up, and they walked home the whole 11 miles without stopping and without speaking once. The doom that Hoskuld Grimson, law speaker of the Vestsund, spoke over the house of Bekkstad that day was this, that no mark of that house should be set in any cloth, and no cloth should be sold in that house's name, for 20 winters. 20 winters. 11 of them served. Of them still to run. There was no fine attached, and people had thought that strange for about a week, and then they had stopped thinking about it, because the district had what it needed. There had been a reason. The reason had a name and a house and a door you could look at from the water. And if you were the mother of one of the 12, you could stand on the strand at Sandvik and look up the hill at a light in a window and know exactly what to do with the thing that was eating you. Her mother never once spoke about it. Not to the district, and not to her own daughter. She wove for 11 years more, with Rekstad's mark going into her work and Rekstad's silver coming back, and she taught Aslaug everything she knew about wool and warp and the beat of a sword beater on a shed, and 6 winters ago she died in the spring of a cough she had had all her life, and she was buried at Sandvik with the 12 names on the stone above her on the slope. And 11 of the 12 houses sent nobody. So that was Aslaug Ketilsdottir. 23 winters old, unmated and unwanted, the last of a doomed house, the finest hand with a warp on that whole sound and forbidden by law to say so, and cutting 3 brown threads out of her own work twice a year with a curved knife. She had made her peace with it. She was not waiting for anything. She had a loom and a roof and 4 sheep and an old woman who ate at her board, and she could look at a finished bolt and know it was the best cloth on that water, and knowing it was enough, and she had told herself that so many times that it had almost stopped being something she had to tell herself. Then a ship came into the Vestsund in the 2nd week of the Frostmoon, which is 2 months after any ship has business there, and everything came apart. She saw it from the loom. You could see 9 miles of water from the north end of that room if the weather was clear. And the weather was clear that morning, hard blue and bitter. And the ship came up the middle of the sound under oars with her sail furled on the yard. And Aslaug stood with a weight in her hand and watched it, and thought, the way anyone would, that somebody was in trouble. Gudny came and stood beside her and squinted. "Whose is it?" "I don't know it. It's big." It was a great deal bigger than anything that belonged on the Vestsund, 30 oars at least, and it went past Rekstad's Naust and past Nesland and put in at Sandvik. And by noon the whole water knew, because a thing like that goes up a sound faster than a horse. The ship was Sjovarg, and she was out of Vargheim, and Vargheim is the seat of the Alpha King. She was not carrying the king. She was carrying his household's business, which on that coast meant much the same thing. And the men who came off her were rope and sailmen and a steward and a scribe. And they paid for their beds in silver and were polite to everybody. And they began that same afternoon to go from house to house up the Vestsund asking one question. Aslaug heard the question before she ever saw the man asking it. Gudny's niece came up the hill with a basket and told them both, delighted with herself. They were asking who wove the sail. What sail? The king's sail, the one on that ship. They want the woman who wove it. Why? The niece did not know why. Nobody knew why. There were 9 different answers going up the sound by evening, and one of them was that the king meant to pay a maker's price for it. And another was that the cloth had failed, and somebody was going to answer for it, and Aslaug stood in her own doorway with her hands wrapped in her apron, and felt the floor of 11 years tilt very slightly under her. She knew what sail. She had known from the moment the girl said it. It was 5 winters back that Rekstad had put out an order for sailcloth, more of it than Ingun's 9 looms could touch. For a buyer Thorleif would not name, and Ingun would not discuss. Aslaug had woven 90 ells of it over 2 winters, and she had done a thing with the headband and the reinforcing bands that she had thought about for a year before she dared it. And when the last bolt went down the path on Thorleif's sledge, she had stood in the door and cried, which she had not done for her mother. She had cut her mark out of every one of those bolts. And now there was a king's ship at Sandvik and a king's men going door to door asking whose hands had done it, and there was exactly one thing in the world that Aslaug Ketilsdottir could not afford, and it was to be found. He came up the path the next morning, on foot, in the worst of the light. She heard the hens first, the way Gudny always did, and then she heard nothing at all for a while. which is what a person hears when something is coming up a snow path and taking its time. When she went to the door, there was a man standing at the bottom of her home field wall with his hands loose at his sides, letting her look at him before he came any closer, which is a courtesy you do not often get from a stranger. He was big, and there was no way around it. Big through the shoulder and the chest in the way of men who have pulled an oar all their lives, with dark blonde hair braided back off his temples and a beard cut short, and he wore a plain undyed sheepskin coat and a leather cap and no rings. No brooch, no silver on him anywhere she could see. He was perhaps 35, weathered dark with a white seam of an old scar through one eyebrow and gray eyes, and he had the stillness that comes off certain men the way cold comes off a wall. And there was a wolf sitting in the snow beside him. Not a dog. A wolf. A big gray one, chest deep in the drift with his ears up and his forelegs neat, watching her with the flat yellow patience of an animal that has never once in its life been afraid of a house. "I'd be glad of leave to come to the door," the man said. "Come then," he came. The wolf came at his knee, stopped when he stopped, and sat down in her yard exactly where the path met the swept ground, and went no further. And Aslaug understood that she was being shown a manner. Then the man took his cap off and stood in her doorway with the snowlight behind him, and the wind changed, and something happened to his face. It was very small. If she had not been looking at him, she would have missed it. He went still in a different way than he had been still before, the way a man goes when he is struck somewhere that does not show. And his hand closed once on the cap and opened again. Aslaug thought the wind had got into a bad tooth. That is what she thought. She would remember thinking it for the rest of her life. "My name is Kari," he said. "I'm a rope and sail man off the ship at Sandvik. I'm asking after a piece of work. So, I've heard." "The whole sound has heard. Then you'll know the question, and I'll save us both the asking." He looked past her, once into the room, at the loom standing black at the north end with 40 ells of gray warp hanging in it and the weight swinging faintly in the draught. And he looked back at her. And he did not look at the loom again. The order for it was taken on this water 5 winters back, and the cloth went south 3 winters ago. And it was cut and sewn at Vargheim into a sail. I want to know whose hands made the cloth. There was a moment there. Aslaug has never been able to say how long it was. Why? Because I was told to find out. That's not why. No, he agreed. It's not. He did not offer anything else. The wolf shifted in the yard and lay down. She could have said it then. She came back to that afterward, over and over, at the loom and in the dark. She could have said, "It was me. It was my hands. I wove 90 ells of it in this room over 2 winters, and I know every joint in it. And every single thing that came after would have been different. But there was a doom on her house, and she had broken it 200 times. And the punishment for breaking a doom of the assembly is not a fine. Bekkstad," she said. "Down the water, the big house with the 2 nousts. Ingunn Sigvaldadottir. Everything that goes south from this sound goes out under her mark. If it was bought at Vargheim, it was bought from her." He looked at her for what felt like a long time. "Bekkstad," he said. "Ask for Thorleif. He'll be civil to you." "Thorleif," he said, and put his cap back on, and thanked her and went. At the wall, the wolf got up and went with him, and Aslaug stood in the door and watched them go down 300 feet of white hillside toward the water, and when they were out of sight she went in and sat down on the bench by the loom and put her hands flat on her knees and could not, for some while, make herself get up. Gudny came round the end of the loom with a distaff under her arm. Who was that? A man from the ship. What did he want? "Nothing," Aslaug said. He was lost. At Bekkstad they gave him ale and a place at the fire, and Ingunn Sigvaldadottir came down herself, which she did not do for everybody. She was near 60, a wide, handsome, upright woman in good dark wool with a silver keyring at her belt, who had built that house out of nothing but weaving and hard bargains after her husband drowned. Her son Kolbeinn Arnarsson stood at her shoulder, 30, well-made, well-dressed, with a light, quick way of talking. The man called Kari asked his question, and Ingunn did not answer straight away, because she had a good ear and had heard in it the shape of a payment. "That would be our cloth," she said. The order came 5 winters back, 90-odd ells. The best fleece we ever took in. It went out of this house with my mark in the headband. "Woven here. Woven under my mark," said Ingunn, which was true, and which is not the same sentence. And she said it easily because she had been saying it for 11 winters. "Woven in this house," said Kolbeinn, who had not learned yet that his mother never told an outright lie when a true one would do the same work. "In the long room. I can show you the looms it came off. I'd like to see them," said Kari. They showed him 9 looms in a long, warm room with 11 women at them and the smell of grease and dye water, and he walked the length of it and asked what weight they were running, and Ingunn answered him well, because she knew her trade. And at the end of it he said, pleasantly, which of them was it made on? "The 3rd and the 4th, said Kolbeinn, after a silence. "A sail's a big thing," said Ingunn smoothly. "It came off 4 of them and out of 2 winters, and I could not tell you now which ell came off which frame, and neither could any woman here. Cloth is cloth." "No," said the man from the ship. "It isn't." He was gone in the morning, and he came back up the hill to Bekkstad at noon with the wolf at his knee and stood at the wall again until she came out. "I want to hire you," he said. The whole of Aslaug went cold, and then she made herself say, "For what?" "For your eyes. I've asked at 6 houses on this water, and every one of them says the same thing when I ask who can read a hand in a cloth. They all say the woman at Bekkstad. Some of them say it before they say their own wives. They tell you that. It's the only answer I've had twice." He waited. "I have the sail aboard at Sandvik, and I can have it ashore in a day. I want it read, and the houses on this water read against it, by somebody who knows the difference between a good cloth and a great one. I'll pay 3 marks of silver and your keep, and I'll pay it whether you find her or not." 3 marks of silver was more than 2 years of Rekstad's price. Aslaug stood in her own doorway and looked at a man who was offering to pay her a small fortune to help him hunt for herself. "Why not Rekstad?" she said. "They'll read it for you. They'd be pleased to. They've read it. They read it in the doorway before they saw it." He said it without any heat at all. "Do you want the work?" She thought about the 9 winters still to run, and about the pot with the threads in it. And then she thought the thing she was least proud of afterward and that was truest. If she said no, he would hire Bergljot at Vadstein, who was a fair reader and a slow one. And Aslaug would sit on this hill unable to eat, while a stranger went over her own work with nobody at his elbow to say the wrong thing. At the right moment. If she went with him, she could steer it. That was the whole of her thinking. "Yes," she said. "I'll take the work." "Good." He put out his hand, and she took it, and his hand was hard and warm, and there was a rope callus across the palm that no lord's man has. And the wolf came off the wall and put his nose against her skirt, and Kari said, "That's Vakr. He'll come in the house if you let him and lie against the loom, and he'll be no trouble. He can lie where he likes." They started the next day, and they were 11 days on the water and the ice paths, and it was the strangest 11 days of her life. They went to Vadstein first, because Bergljot was a talker and Aslaug wanted the whole sound to hear early that she was doing this openly. Bergljot brought out 20 ells of her best, and Aslaug went over it on the trestle with her thumb and the light, and read it out the way her mother had taught her. The count to the thumb, the beat, the twist in the weft, whether the woman had spun it herself, whether she leaned when she beat. Good even weight, she said. She sets 14 to the thumb and she keeps it. She spins Z and weaves it hard. But look here at the join. She carries the new thread 3 fingers and lets it lie. Whoever wove your cloth would not do that. How do you know? Because your cloth is a king's sail, said Aslaug, and a woman who lets a join lie doesn't get one. He wrote nothing down. He had a scribe on the ship and had left him there, and went from house to house with a wolf and no ink and asked to be told things and remembered them. At Nestlin the mistress kept them standing in the yard before she brought cloth out, because she had not liked Aslaug's mother, and Nestlin set 12 to the thumb and beat soft. At Hoven old Tarun held Aslaug's hand at the door a moment longer than she needed to, and said, "You've your mother's hands," and outside in the snow he did not ask what that had been about. That was the second thing she noticed. He never asked. They slept in byres and in the corners of halls and once in a boat shed at Nestland with a fire between them and the wolf across the door. And he talked when she talked and was quiet when she was not. And he did the work of 2 men on the paths without ever making a thing of it. Broke the trail. Carried the reading trestle. Hauled her up the ice at the Sandvik landing by the wrist. And let go the instant she was up. On the 4th night she caught herself telling him about her mother. Not the doom, but the loom, and the groove in the top beam, and how her mother would not let her touch a weight until she could tell 3 fleeces apart in the dark, and how she sang counting songs to keep the beat and got the words wrong on purpose to see if Aslaug was listening. She heard herself doing it, and stopped in the middle of a sentence, furiously embarrassed. "Go on," he said. "It isn't anything." "It's the most anybody's said to me in 3 winters," said the man in the sheepskin coat, and turned a log over in the fire and did not look at her, and let her decide what to do with that. By the 8th day there were 3 houses left, and she was running out of water to steer him over. On the 9th day the sail came ashore. They spread it on the strand below Sandvik in hard blue morning light, on clean trodden snow above the tide line, because there is nowhere else on that coast big enough. 8 men off Sjovarg walking it out of the ship's belly and laying it flat, and it came out and out and out until it lay there like a frozen field. 90 ells of it. Gray, white, and ochre red in broad bands with the bull-trope round it and the rope lattice still laced across the outer face. And the strand went quiet the way people go quiet around something very large. She had woven every thread of it in a room 300 feet up a hill, 16 ells at a time, and it had gone out of her house on a sledge in pieces, and she had never in her life seen the thing itself. She had to put her hand over her mouth. "Take your time," said Kari. She walked out onto her own work in her boots. The frost creaked. The bands ran away from her under her feet, red and gray. And the light came up off the snow and through the weave and showed her every single thing she had done. The headband where she had run the reinforcement 4 fingers deeper than any sailmaker asks for. The joins she had feathered over a hand's length so that there was no line at all. The lattice points where she had set a doubled weft in a diamond 3 winters of thinking, so that the strain went 4 ways out of every point instead of 2. Which is the reason, though she did not know it, standing there, that 40 men came home in the autumn 3 winters ago out of a wind that took the mast out of the ship behind them. She knelt down in the middle of it and put both palms flat on the cloth. Behind her, up the strand, the man in the sheepskin coat stood with his wolf and watched her do it and said nothing whatsoever. "Well," said the steward off the ship, after a while. "Can she read it or not?" Aslaug got up. Her face, when she turned round, was perfectly calm. She had had 11 winters of practice. "Vadstein," she said. "It's Bergeljot's hand. She sets 14 to the thumb, and this is 14. And out on the flat white strand, with 90 ells of her own life lying under her boots, she watched the man she had told that to look at her for a long moment, and then nod slowly, and say, Vadstein, in the voice of a man putting something carefully away where he can find it later. She expected him to go. That was the whole of her plan, and she had not thought past it. He had his answer, and it was 4 miles down the water in a house with a talkative mistress and a middling loom, and he would take it there and be gone before the pass shut, and Aslaug would go back up her hill and never speak of any of it again. He did not go. He watched them fold the sail back into the ship's belly, 8 men and an hour of work, and he paid the strandmen. And then he walked up to Sandvik and said a thing in the hall there that went up the Vestsund by dark and knocked the whole district sideways. He said that the king's household did not buy a name. He said the maker's price for that sail, and he named it, and the number went round the water in a night. 12 marks of silver, which was more than any house on that sound had ever held at one time, would be paid to the hands that made it at the winter thing at Sandvik, the way the crown pays for work, hand on the work, and a swearing. That is the old way, and there is no arguing with it. Silver for goods is paid on a bargain. Silver for a piece of work is paid on the work itself, because the crown does not buy things, it honors them, and honor handed to the wrong person is worth nothing afterward. So the sail would be spread at the thing, and whoever claimed it would walk out onto it and lay both hands flat on the headband before the whole Vestsund and swear the words, "These are my hands' work, and no other woman's." And if 2 claim it? Somebody asked him. Then 2 will swear, said Kari, and one of them will be a false swearer in front of her own district, and the law can have her. At Vadstein, Bergljot heard by the following noon that the reader off the king's ship had walked her cloth and named her house. She was not a dishonest woman. She was 40 years at a loom, and knew perfectly well she had never woven 90 ells of anything, and she said so. Twice, to the first people who came to congratulate her. Then she stopped saying it. That is not a wicked thing. That is a woman with 3 daughters and a leaking roof standing in front of 12 marks of silver and a district that is already decided. And by the 3rd day, Bergljot was saying she had had a great order out of Rekstad's hands 5 winters back, which was very nearly true, since Rekstad had put out 20 ells to her that year for a tarpaulin. And at Rekstad, Ingunn Sigvaldadottir stopped sleeping, because now there was a hand on the work, not a mark, a hand. Ingunn could put her mark on anything that came off any loom on that water, and had for 11 winters, and no law had ever touched her for it, because a mark is a house's word, and a house may put its word where it likes. But no power on earth was going to get Ingunn of Rekstad out onto 90 ells of that cloth in front of 400 people to swear it came off her hands. She had not touched a loom herself in 15 years, and there were 11 women in her long room who knew it. There was exactly 1 woman on the Vestsund who could walk out onto that sail and swear that oath and have it be true. Kolbein Arnarsson came up the hill to Bekkstad 3 days after the strand on a horse, which was not necessary, and he did not take his cap off. He was pleasant about it for the first while. He walked round the room and said it was a wonder anybody could see to work in that light. And he stood with his back to the fire, which is a thing a guest does not do. "You've heard the terms," he said. "The whole water's heard. Then you'll have seen the difficulty." He smiled at her. "My mother can't swear it. You can. And you can't, because there's a doom on this house, and every ell you've sold in 11 winters has been sold against it. And if you set foot on that cloth in front of Hoskuld Grimson, you'll be sworn out of your own hill by nightfall. So marry me," said Kolbein Arnarsson. Aslaug stood with a warp weight in her hand and looked at him. "You'd come into the house," he said, "and the looms are yours, all 9 of them, and you'd run that room and my mother would let you. And the moment the words are said, everything you make is Rekstad's work in law, and everything you have made becomes a wife's work in her husband's house, and the whole thing is clean. The mark's true. The claim's true. You stand up at the thing as Aslaug of Bekkstad and lay your hands on that sail and swear. And nobody on this water can touch you. And there's 12 marks of silver in it. And half of it's yours. He spread his hands. It solves it for both of us. And if I say no, why would you say no? He said it with a real astonishment that she thought about for a long time afterward, because it was not cruelty. It was arithmetic. You're 23. You've no father, no brother, no man on this hill, and no prospect of one. Because there's not an alpha from here to the King's Water who'd take a doomed house even with a good omega in it. I know what you are. Everybody knows what you are. That's the joke of it. You're the best-scented, worst-placed woman on this sound, and you'll die on this hill with 4 sheep and a pot of silver you daren't spend. I'm offering you the one door out that anybody is ever going to offer you, and you're standing there with that face on. No, said Aslaug. Say that again. No, take your horse off my ground. He stood very still, and the pleasantness went out of him like heat out of a stone. You'll change your mind, he said. There's 6 weeks to the thing. You'll sit up here and count it and come down that hill and knock on my mother's door, and I'll tell you now, the price goes down every week you leave it. Then it'll be very cheap by the Frostmoon. He went. She stood in the door until the horse was small, and then her legs went, and she sat down on the threshold in the snow with her back against the frame and put her forehead on her knees. And a shadow came across her. The man in the sheepskin coat, standing in her yard with an armful of split birch, who had been at the wood stack for the whole of it, and could not have failed to hear a word. He did not say anything about it. He put the wood down inside the door and went back out and split more. That was how the 6 weeks began. He never asked to stay. He simply did not leave and took his keep in work, and after 4 days nobody remarked on it. He mended the byre door that had not shut properly since her mother's time. He went up the scree with a rope in a wind that would have kept most men in the house, and brought down the 2 ewes that had got onto the ledge. He hauled wool and relaid the noused roof, and he learned to dress a warp weight and keep the shed clear with a pickup stick, and he never once touched the cloth without asking, which is the only thing a weaver actually requires of anybody. And he was in that room. That was the trouble. He was in that room, 5 feet from the loom, quiet, for hours at a stretch, with the wolf lying along the base of the frame, and Aslaug beat the weft down, and talked more in those 6 weeks than she had talked in the previous 6 years. She told him which houses had married which, and who would not sit next to whom at Sandvik, and why. And that the sound had a way of being kind to you at the same time as it was finishing with you. She told him one night that she had stood in the hall at Sandvik 4 times and gone home 4 times and was not sorry about it, and he said, "Aren't you?" And she said, "No," and then sat there with the beater in her hands and thought, that was a lie. And he knows it is. He talked, too, in his way when the fire was low. He told her about a run down the coast where they were 9 days out of sight of land. Then he told her about the storm, and he did not say it was his ship. He said, the ship. It came out of the northeast at dusk, he said, and it took the mast out of the ship behind us, and we watched it go. We had 40 men aboard and 90 ells up. And the yard was too high and we could not get it down, and every man on that deck knew what was coming, because it always comes. A sail lets go at the head. It splits at the reinforcement and goes out of the bolt rope like a hand out of a glove, and then you are a log in the water. Every one of us stood there waiting for it. And it held. He turned his cup round on his knee. It held for 11 hours. And in the morning it was still there, and there was not one thread started at the head band, and the man beside me, a hard old thing, no God in him at all, went and put his face against it. Aslaug found she had stopped beating. So he came looking for whoever made it, she said carefully. Your king. So he came looking. He could have sent silver. He could have sent silver 3 winters ago, said Kari. He didn't. He went himself, 3 winters, up every water on this coast, because he wanted to stand in front of her. He looked up. You'll think that's a foolish thing for a man in his position. I think, said Aslaug, that he'd have done better to send a scribe. He thinks so too, most days. And then, on the night of the Frostmoon, when they had gone out to bring the ewes down and stopped on the shoulder of the hill because the whole Vestsund lay under them white and black and perfectly still, and the moon came up over the scree and put a road on the water, he said the thing that she did not understand for another 6 weeks. Do you know what's in cloth? He said. Wool, grease, whatever's in the water it was washed in. The woman who made it, he said. That's what's in it. She laughed. She actually laughed, standing there with her breath going up white, because she thought he was being poetic and she had never once in her life met a man who was. That's a nice thing to say. It's not a nice thing, he said. It's a fact, and I have been living inside it for 3 winters. That sail came off the yard wet in the Vargheim Naust, and I put my hands in it, and it was not wool and it was not grease. He was not looking at the water anymore. 40 men came home. I could have found her in a week if she had ever once put a mark in it. She never did. Not one thread in 90 ells. And I have been up and down this coast for 3 winters asking the wrong question of the wrong people, and every house hands me a lie with both hands and I let them, because I would rather be lied to on the right water than told the truth on the wrong one. The moon was on his face, and Aslaug's heart was going so hard she thought he must hear it. You'll find her, she said. Yes, said the Alpha King of Vargheim, looking at her. I think I will. And he did not touch her, and she did not move, and after a while they went down and got the ewes. The summons came 9 days before the thing. It came the way they always come, by the law speaker's man, on foot, in the middle of the afternoon, with 2 witnesses standing at the wall to see it done. He read it in her yard with his cap off, because Hoskuld Grimson's men were courteous even when they were ruining you. Kolbeinn Arnarsson of Bekkstad brought suit against Aslaug Ketilsdottir of Bekkstad, that she had for 11 winters, in defiance of a doom of this assembly, woven cloth for sale, that she had by that deceit procured the mark of the house of Bekkstad to be set on work not lawfully markable, whereby the good name of that house was put in danger before the crown, that she be made to answer at the winter thing at Sandvik, and that the doom on Bekkstad be extended, and the house forfeit. Aslaug stood in the snow and listened to it, and did not move a muscle in her face. He had got there first. That was all it was. He had looked at the same board she had been looking at for 6 weeks, and he had seen that one of them was going to be standing in front of Hoskuld Grimson at the winter thing explaining 11 winters of cloth, and he had made sure it was her. You may answer with an oath, the law speaker's man said, and with such witnesses as will stand for you. I'm sorry, Aslaug, how many do I need? For a doom breaking? 1 will serve, if he's clean. He folded the skin. But he'd want to be a man who was in that room and saw the work done. And there is nobody on this water who will stand up against Bekkstad for Bekkstad. He was right about that. She spent the next 6 days finding out exactly how right. She went to the 12 houses. She went to all of them, in order, from the head of the sound to the mouth on foot, in the 6 days she had, and she was polite at every one, and she did not once say the thing standing behind her teeth, which was that her mother had wept for their men. At the first house they would not open. At the second, a woman she had carded wool with as a girl came out and said, "Not for your house, Aslaug," and closed it gently, which was worse. At the fourth, the man of the house looked at the floor and said Bekkstad held his winter hay. At the 9th house the man said, "Your mother killed my father," and shut the door in her face, and she stood in the snow and thought, "No," and then thought, "How would I know?" At the 12th, at the mouth of the sound, an old woman named Ragnhild, who had been the skipper Ottar Hrafnsson's wife, came out to the gate herself. She was over 70, and she did not ask Aslaug in. She looked at her a long time, and then said something that made no sense at all. "Is it Hoskold's court?" "Yes. Does he still keep his rolls?" "I don't know," said Aslaug. "I suppose he does." Ragnhild's mouth worked. She put her hand up and held the gatepost, and she said, "No. I'll not stand for you." And she turned round and went in, and she was crying, and Aslaug walked 11 miles home in the dark, understanding nothing. She asked him on the last night, at the fire, and she could hardly get it out. "Kolbeinn said it in my house," she said. "He said the mark's true and the claim's true. Marry me and the whole thing's clean. He said it in front of the fire, and you were at the wood stack. If somebody swears to that, then Bekkstad knew. And it isn't a deceit. It's a bargain. And the worst they can do to me is the doom I've already got." I know what he said. Would you stand up and say it? He was a long time answering, and when he did, he was not looking at her. "If you ask me to stand at that ring," he said, "I will do it. But I want you to know that I would rather cut my hand off, and I can't tell you why until it's done." "Then don't tell me," said Aslaug. "Just stand up." "Then I'll stand up," said the Alpha King of Vargheim. The winter thing of the Vestsund was held on the flat field above the strand at Sandvik in the first week of winter, and near 400 people came. Because a doom case brings everybody, and this one had 12 marks of silver and a king's ship in it. They set the poles out at first light, hazel poles at 12 paces with the rope run round them, which makes the ground inside a lawful place. The law rock is at the north end, and in front of it is a flat gray stone about the size of a table, and on that stone, at the opening of a thing. They set out the ring. It is not a great thing to look at. It is a plain, heavy arm ring of silver, and every district on that coast has one. And every one of them comes out of the king's own hall, sent north when a law speaker is made, sent back when he dies, and never moved in between. And that is the first thing anybody on that coast learns about the thing, and the last thing an old man forgets. A hand goes on the ring to swear, and it stays on the stone while you swear it, and nobody lifts the ring off the stone but the hand it was sent from. Hoskold Grimsson was past 80 and had been law speaker of the Vestsund for 31 years. They had to help him up onto the rock, and once he was on it, he did not need any help at all. Kolbeinn Arnarsson put his case first, and he put it well. He had Thorleif brought, and Thorleif told the truth, because he was not a liar, and every true word out of him went into Aslaug like a nail. That he had gone up to Bekkstad twice a year for 11 winters, that he had carried cloth down and silver up, that he had never once seen a mark of any house in it. Ingunn sat with her hands in her lap and her face like a shut door. Kolbeinn asked for the doom to be extended by 20 winters and the house forfeit, and said in a voice that carried beautifully that a woman who will weave under a false name for 11 winters will do anything at all. Then Hoskold said, "Aslaug Ketilsdottir, answer." And she stood up in front of 400 people and answered. And her voice did not shake, and she said the only true thing there was, that she had woven, yes, every winter, that she had sold it to Bekkstad and taken silver for it, and that she would not pretend otherwise in front of that ring, and that Bekkstad had known from the first day to the last, and had come to her house 6 weeks before this thing, and offered her a marriage to make the mark good, in her own room, at her own fire, in front of a witness. The field made a noise like weather coming. "Name him," said Hoskold. "Kari, a rope and sail man off the king's ship. Let him come forward." He came out of the crowd on the east side with the wolf beside him, and stopped in front of the law rock in his sheepskin coat with his cap in his hand, and Hoskold looked down at him. Kolbeinn was on his feet before the old man opened his mouth. "He's her household man," he said. "He's eaten her bread 6 weeks. He's carried her wood and hauled her sheep off the scree, and half this sound has seen him do it. A household man does not witness for his household. Throw him out." "That is well taken," said Hoskuld. "The law is plain. A witness declares his house before he swears." He turned. "Whose man are you?" And Aslaug, who had lied to that man on a strand with her own life's work under her boots, who had spent 6 weeks steering him off her own doorstep, who could feel the whole thing going out from under her like ice, Aslaug answered for him. "He's mine," she said. "He's hired to Bekkstad. He came for the sale, and he stayed for his keep, and he's my house's man. And if that makes his word worth less, then take it as less." But he was in that room. There was a small, terrible silence. "Is that so?" said Hoskuld to the man in the sheepskin coat. He did not answer. "He'll not say it," said Kolbein, delighted. "Look at him." "Let him clear himself, then. Let him swear on the ring that he is no man's man of Rekstad, and no man's man of Bekkstad, and takes no fee in this, and then let him swear to his testimony after, and we'll all hear both." "That is his right and his burden," said Hoskuld. "Go to the stone." And Aslaug went with him. She should not have. Nobody goes to the stone with a swearer. She went anyway, at his elbow, and she got hold of his sleeve at the wrist with both hands the way you hold on to a gate in a wind, and she was talking the whole way, low and fast, and half the field could see her doing it. "Just say it," she said. "Say you're mine. It's 3 words. It isn't even a lie. You've eaten at my board 6 weeks. That is what a household man is." "I'll pay whatever it costs you. I'll pay the 3 marks back. I'll pay it twice. Kari, look at me. Put your hand on it and say it, and we can go home." He stopped at the stone. He looked down at her hands on his wrist, and then at her face, and there was something in his own face that she did not have a name for until much later, when she had had a great deal of time to think about it. "I told you I'd rather cut my hand off," he said. "I know. Do it anyway." "Aslaug," he said. "I'm sorry." And he took his wrist gently out of her hands, and he leaned down over the flat gray stone, and he put both hands under the silver ring, and he picked it up. There is no sound quite like 400 people not breathing. He straightened with the ring in his 2 hands and held it against his chest. And the wind moved the rope on the hazel poles, and nobody moved at all. Aslaug stood beside him with her hands still up in the air where his wrist had been, and she was, for about 4 heartbeats, the only person on that field who did not understand. Then old Hoskuld Grimson got down off the law rock. It took him a while, and no one helped him. He stood in front of the man in the sheepskin coat, and took his cap off his white head, and said in a voice that carried to the poles, "The ring is up. The thing is the king's." And 400 men took their weapons in their hands and struck them once. Axe haft on shield rim, one single enormous crack across a frozen field. The weapon take, which is how that coast has said yes for 600 years. And 400 women put their hands out flat, and it was over. And the Vestsund had a king standing in the middle of it in a sheepskin coat with a wolf against his leg. Aslaug's knees did not go. She would be proud of that afterward. She stood and looked at him and said, out loud, in a voice like a girl's, "You let me put you in a byre. I asked for the byre. You let me lie to you on the strand." "Yes," said Kjartan Redarson, "Alpha King of Vargheim, I did, and put the ring down on the stone, which nobody has ever seen a king do, and said to the whole field, 'Sit down. This case is not finished, and I am not fit to judge it, and I am going to tell you why.' He was party to it, and he said so plainly his own household had bought 90 ells of cloth under a mark that was not the maker's. And a man who judges a case he stands inside is not a king. He is a thief with a rock to sit on. So he would not doom it. But the ring was up and could not be put back down. And there was one thing the crown could do that no district can. 'Law speaker,' he said. You cannot extend a doom the crown has not read. Fetch the roll. Hoskuld sent his man. It took an hour. Nobody left the field. And when the old man came back, he had a rolled skin in a leather case that had not been opened in 11 winters. And he untied it on the law rock with his hands shaking, not from age, and read the doom of the House of Bekkstad out loud to the Vestsund for the first time since the day it was spoken. It did not say what the Vestsund had been saying for 11 winters. There was no finding of fault in it. Not one word. The thing of that year, it said, having heard the ship's men and the strand men and 3 sailmakers, could not determine whether the cloth had failed, or the sewing, or the sheet hand, or the load, and being unable to determine it, the assembly had done the old thing an assembly does when it cannot see. It had offered self-doom. Self-doom is given to the side the thing cannot find against. It is the honorable end of a case that has no bottom to it. The party who takes it judges its own cause, and whatever it lays on itself, the assembly must accept. The thing of that year had offered self-doom to Herdis Torbjornsdottir of Bekkstad, and Herdis Torbjornsdottir had stood up on that same field, in front of these same people, and doomed her own house. She had doomed it to pay the whole wergild of all 12 men, at 2 marks a man, 24 marks in all, out of the goods of Bekkstad, within the year. And she had doomed the house to carry no mark and sell no cloth in its own name, for 20 winters, so that no one could say afterward that Bekkstad had bought its way clean and gone on trading on a good name. She had judged herself guilty in silver, in public, of a thing the assembly had just told her it could not prove she had done. There is a line at the end, said Hoskuld, in my own hand, because she asked for it and I did not want to write it. He held the skin out at arm's length, the way old men do. It says, and this doom is not to be cried through the district as a doom of the thing, but as the doom of the house upon itself, and the reason of it not to be told. He rolled the skin up. She paid it inside the year, he said. It took the ship, the shore field at the water, 30 sheep and every ounce of silver in that house, and Rekstad bought the shore field in the spring for less than half what it was worth. I have sat on this rock 31 years and watched this district spend 11 winters hating a woman who fed it out of her own hands, and I have kept that roll on a shelf 40 paces from where you are standing. Not one of you ever asked me for it. And in the crowd at the mouth of the field an old woman went down on the trodden snow. And it was Ragnhild, Ottar Hrafinson's widow, and she was saying, over and over, that she had begged her not to. And it came out of her there, in front of everybody, the thing she had carried for 11 winters, that the Shabjorn went out that autumn 14 barrels over her marks. And it was Ottar himself who put them aboard at the last, and 3 in that hall had known it, and one of them was Herdis. And if the fault had gone to the ship, it would have gone to Ottar. And Ottar's house would have owed the wergild to the other 11 with nothing to pay it out of. And 11 houses would have got their men's price out of a widow's empty hands in 20 years of pennies, if ever. So a weaver had stood up and taken it. Aslaug Ketilsdottir stood in the middle of a field in front of 400 people and found out, at 23 years old, what the pot of brown threads by her loom had been for. The king put the case in her hands. He did it without any ceremony. He said the crown could not judge a cause it stood inside, that there was one lawful way out of it, and that it had been good enough for her mother. He offered self-doom to the house of Bekkstad. Aslaug took a while. Nobody hurried her. When she spoke to Hoskuld and not to him, because she had already worked out that it was the only way she would get through it. Then, I doom my house, she said. Say it, and it stands. The doom my mother laid on us runs 9 more winters, and I'll not have it lifted for kindness. But it was laid to keep a false name out of the market, and there's no false name left in this sound to keep out. So let it run to its day with the roll read out loud at the opening of everything until it's done, all of it, including the last line. Let them hear who paid for their men. That's the first thing. The second. Rekstad set its mark on 11 winters of my work, and I took the silver, so we can both stand there and be looked at. I'll have no fine off them. I'll have wool, Rekstad's own fleece off Rekstad's own flock, 90 ells worth, brought up my hill by Kolbein Arnarsson's own hands, load by load, because neither he nor his mother ever came up it until there was silver in it. The third. The maker's price is 12 marks. I'll not have it. Break it into 12 and put a mark into each of those 12 houses, and when you put it in their hands, say whose hands it came out of, and say it in front of somebody. My mother paid them in the dark. I'll not do it in the dark twice. And for myself, and here her voice did go, once and she got it back. For myself I want one thing, and it is not silver and it is not the hill. I want my mark. I want leave to put 3 threads of brown in the headband of my own cloth which the crown can give and this district cannot. And I want it before I weave another ell, because I am 23 years old and I have never once in my life sold a piece of work with my name in it. And Hoskuld Grimson said, "It is spoken, and it stands," and the weapon take went across that field a second time. And it was louder than the first. He came up the hill 4 days later, at dusk, on foot, with the wolf. She heard the hens. She did not go out. She stood in her own doorway with her hands in her apron and watched him come the last of the way up, and she was so angry she could hardly see, and so glad the anger could get no purchase. And both of those things went on being true for a long time afterward. "You could have told me," she said. "Yes, on the strand. In the byre, on the hill under the moon. Yes, why didn't you? Because the day I said it, the crown was in your business, and the crown coming into a doom case does not go gently. I meant to find a way to have it end with you standing in a field with your mark back and not in a ship going south under guard. I was 6 weeks building that, and Kolbein Arnarsson knocked it over in an afternoon. He stopped at the wall, where he had stopped the very first day, and let her look at him. And there was the other thing. I said it to you on the hill, and you laughed at me. Say it in words, said Aslaug, because I have had a very long month. 3 winters ago a sail came down wet on my own deck, and I put my face in it, he said, and I have not had a night's proper sleep since. I did not know whether the woman it came off was 60 years old, or married, or 4 sounds away, or in the ground, and a thing that gets into a man like that has to be answered one way or the other. So I went up every water on this coast. And then a door opened on a hill above the Vestsund, and the wind changed. And there she was, standing in it with a knife in her hand and a lie already in her mouth. He was not a poetic man, and he did not get any better at it. You knew, she said. At the door. The first morning. I knew before I had my cap off. You let me take you round 6 houses. I'd have gone round 60, he said. You were talking to me. The moon was coming up over the scree behind the house, and the frost was already hard. And the wolf had gone in past her without being asked and lain down along the base of the loom, in the place that had been his place for 6 weeks. I am going to ask you a thing, said the Alpha King of Vargheim. And if you say no, the wool still comes, and the roll is still red, and none of it hangs on this. I've a hall with a cold room in it, and 30 ships, and not one woman in the whole of Vargheim I want to look at. Come south with me. Bring the loom, bring the old woman, bring the wolf. He's yours anyway. He has not sat at my knees since the day he met you. And weave your sails. Weave whatever you like, or nothing, he said. I would like you at my table and in my house, and I would like to say your name out loud in a room without wanting to break something, and I have been 6 weeks not saying so. Aslaug Ketilsdottir came out of her doorway into the snow of her own yard, in the light of the Frostmoon, and stood in front of him, close enough that he had to look down. Then say it in a room, she said. They were 3 winters getting the next sail made, because 90 ells is 90 ells, and she would not be hurried. Rekstad's wool came up that hill on Kolbeinn Arnarson's back, load by load, all of it, and the district is still talking about it. The 12 marks went into 12 houses with her mother's name said out loud on every doorstep. And at the mouth of the sound, Ragnhild would not take hers until Aslaug sat down at her fire. And then she took it. And at the opening of everything at Sandvik, for 9 more winters, Hoskuld's roll was read to the whole field, down to the last line in a shaking hand. And there was never a year that somebody did not cry. The sail was finished in the spring of the 3rd year. They spread it on the strand below Sandvik to smear it, 90 ells of grey and ochre lying on the shingle with half the Vestsund standing round it, and the Queen of Vargheim knelt at the headband in front of all of them with a needle and 3 threads of undyed brown. She had done it 10,000 times in the dark. It took her about as long as it takes to say a name. It is still on the water, that sail. If you stand at the mouth of the Vestsund in the spring, you can see it come up the sound. And if you know where to look, right at the head where the strain runs 4 ways out of every point, there is a small crooked shape in it like a bird's foot.